Hi there. My name is Sean Cotter. I am the executive director for Wicked Queer, Boston's LGBTQ plus film festival, and I'm sitting here with Bruce LaBruce, who's the director of Saint-Narcisse, which is playing in our festival. Bruce, welcome. Thanks for sitting down with me.
Thanks for having me.
I guess to start out with, tell me a little bit about Saint-Narcisse and what sort of led you to want to make this film.
I started writing it quite a while ago. It um, so I was developing the script over the past 5 years, and we finally got it financed. The financing came through 2 years ago, I guess. And you know, my movies are quite often about fetish, and so sometimes that'll be my starting point for a movie. And I did Gerontophilia was the last film I did that was financed in Quebec as well. And so I was kind of interested by the phenomenon of twincest. I'd seen, all this twincest porn on the internet, and I've known I've had best friends who are twins, and so I've always been fascinated by twins. And but then it occurred to me that it might be an interesting kind of link to talk about narcissism as well. And so as usual, I started out with more kind of almost pornographic intent. The working title of the film was Twincest. And gradually, through the writing, and it became more of a kind of a strongly narrative kind of feature film with a somewhat intricate plot, and we got a pretty good budget for it. I'll have to make my twincest porn separately with real twins.
I hope so, because I have to say, like, what I really loved about this film is yes, it has the sort of like the sort of exploration of the fetish and the sort of the taboos that go along with it, but I thought it was like a sort of a joyous sort of celebration of sort of polyamory as well, which I think is refreshing and not really seen a lot in sort of queer cinema.
Mm,
Usually, like, I mean, polyamory is usually it's very like, ooh,
yeah.
uh, and it's a sensationalized, but I found that you created, like, I'm polyamorous myself. So for me,
Mm,
what I really kind of took from it is this sort of like family, I mean, family literally, but also family, like, as in units, as a sort of like not really a couple, but like a group that sort of like love each other.
mm.
So, I mean, maybe kind of talk about your sort of like your thought process of sort of defining the family as such, and how you kind of got there.
Well, there's a lot going on there. The first thing is like, I always find it strange that LGBTQI plus, one thing that kind of tends to get glossed over is the B.
Hmm.
Um, uh, there's a kind of very strong movement that's I call the Born This Way movement, the Gaga movement, where where people just want to believe that gay people are born gay and it's not a choice, and that they have no other choice. I've never believed that. I believe in Freud's notion of constitutional bisexuality, that everyone is born with bisexual potential,
Hmm.
and I think it's a combination of nature and nurture. So it's true that some people are pretty much defined in infancy, what their sexuality is going to be, but you're not supposed to really make movies about it. In a way, you're not supposed to acknowledge that. I mean, I think there's a bit of an insecurity there on the part of gays. They don't want to acknowledge that maybe there might be some attraction to the other, either if you're gay or lesbian, to the opposite sex. So that's one thing I've always done in my films. I've made films about subcultures who don't identify as gay, but they're having sex with each other regardless, and even forming loving relationships and still not identifying as gay, loving sexual relationships. So it's about identity, you know. So that is one thing that is going on in Gerontophilia. And the other thing is, I was thinking of Freud's. Unfortunately, I'm pretty much a Freudian at heart. I've read all the Freudian revisionists and everything, so I'm quite aware of the problematics of Freud, and in terms of sort of patriarchal inscription and all that kind of stuff. And I even did a theater piece in Berlin called The Bad Breast, which was about Melanie Klein, who's a kind of feminist Freudian revisionist. But Freud has this idea of family romance, his concept of family romance, which is really just acknowledging that there's sexual tensions within the nuclear family. There's that, and his controversial theory of child sexuality as well, that postulates that there is a kind of sexual component to infantile development, and with the relationship with the mother and the breast and all that kind of stuff. So that all figured in, and I was almost making the film is almost like a black comedy. It has a lot of melodramatic elements, but I was creating a scenario where what fascinates me about twincest is it's taboo, but it's, in terms of incest taboos, it's probably the most socially acceptable incest taboo, because everyone can kind of understand that if you had a replica of yourself, exact replica of yourself in your life, that there would be some kind of sexual connection, between the two. And I know I've known twins where that's the case, So, but there's also, like, in the film, other kinds of incest, like that aren't true incest. So the mother, the mother of the twins, had a lesbian lover, and now who died, and then she's living with her daughter. So
who's also a twin of the mother, which is kind of super interesting.
Right. So, but technically, there's no prohibition, at least not with regards to the law of, like, say, a mother sleeping with her girlfriend's daughter. But there is a kind of social or moral disapprobation for someone who would do that, So it's kind of, the film is kind of examining those taboos that are in place, but they're social taboos, but they're not exactly clear, or they can be transgressed under certain circumstances. And even the relationship between Daniel, the other twin, and the demented priest is kind of like a father-son relationship. Of course, religion being the father, and Christianity, and that's that sets up a whole other kind of parallel incest scenario. So I think it's quite a interesting kind of, almost a comedy of errors, with regard to incest.
I mean, it really is, and you really kind of. I'm glad that you sort of are kind of deem it sort of a comedy, because it's not. I mean, it's not like knee slapping laughs.
No.
But there is, like, I found so much humor in it as watching it. Especially, I watched it again last night just to kind of like get it fresh in my brain, so for our conversation. And there were so many, like, little gag jokes in it that I really kind of appreciated, like when Daniel is sort of like having the conversation with the priest, and he's reading The Exorcist, which
right,
I thought
I think really a lot of people wouldn't maybe catch the first time. And that it came out that the same year as the film is set in 72. And when I was in school at that time, everyone was reading The Exorcist. I mean, it was like being passed around, and that speaking of taboo sexuality and religion, I mean,
The Exorcist, you can't get any, and it's also like your film is really a love letter to 1972 as well. Like the soundtrack, I mean, the art direction in it is like, it's amazing. Like, I want Dominic's boots. Like,
I know,
they're so good.
Those boots are. Are very central, yeah.
But it is really truly a love letter to like 1972 as well. So what did you choose to sort of portray it in sort of 1972?
My favorite, one of my favorite eras of filmmaking is I would say, late 60s, second half of the 60s, right up to 1980, both in Europe and the States and Canada. So, it was a very particular moment in cinematic history where, in terms of Hollywood, where people were questioning all the conventions of Hollywood, the narrative conventions, the subjects, how a movie is supposed to conform to certain, not only formal conventions and like camera, the way the camera uh, uh, captures the action, and but also kind of like um, myths that Hollywood perpetrates in terms of family, in terms of the status quo, And so uh, all sorts of filmmakers from that era were challenging that. So Robert Altman and Cassavetes and, um, you know, uh, Frank Perry is one of my favorites, and in Quebec there was a filmmaker named Paul Almond who was the husband of Geneviève Bujold, and they made a trilogy of films together in that era. Well, that blew my mind as a kid. Like, there was one called "The Act of the Heart," where a priest has an affair, a Catholic priest has an affair with a young girl, with a teenage girl, or young 18-year-old girl, and they end up fucking on the altar. And then at the end, she goes to a park, douses herself with gasoline, and sets herself on fire. I mean, as the end credits roll.
As you
And
do.
I saw this when I was like 10 or something, or 12, on TV, on Canadian TV. And I was like, what the it
Right.
just that just like that kind of like open. I thought, is this like, what kind of like psychosexual dynamic would, and the church would cause something like that to happen, and also Robert Altman's That Cold Day in the Park, which I remade as my first film, feature film, No Skin Off My Ass.
Yep.
When I saw that on Canadian television as a kid, I literally thought, wow, it was so psychosexually twisted, about this spinster who keeps a hustler locked up in her guest bedroom. I was like, oh my God, this must be what porn is like, because back then you had no access to porn.
Right.
Or internet. So anyway, those films had a huge influence on me. So I've always referenced them in my movies, and anything that challenges like conventions and ideas of how sexuality is supposed to be something regulated and normalized. That really attracts me, and the aesthetics as well, of course.
Yeah, for me, like it, because I don't necessarily have the Quebecois kind of like viewpoint. It reminded me a lot of the Audubon films of like Radley Metzger, um, stuff like that, that sort of had that sort of look, but also challenged those sort of taboos, and often were very queer with their sexuality. Like Score, for example, is really super queer. It's like a swinging couple that kind of they pass the
Yeah.
peppermill of marijuana joints and kind of have their sort of like go to seduce the young couple in the village kind of thing.
Yeah, and you had, in terms of the family, I mean, you had like also polyamory happening, in that era as well, and it was also very much an era of kind of the death of the 60s, where you had all that idealism of the 60s and hippies and open free liberation, and then how that all kind of like went to hell at a certain point.
Which is just, I mean, sort of all that opening up of sort of sexuality and stuff like that kind of brings you sort of back to the core of what we sort of all kind of like crave, which is like sort of connection and also sort of family building. And regardless of whether it's actually blood family or not,
Mhm.
that sort of family unit or a unit of support is always really important.
Yeah, and Paul Alban's other film, Isabel, and quite often films of that era have incest components in them as well. So it really is like the rupture, all the repression that happens. The thing I should say about family romance is, you know, what instead of like Freud kind of advocated, instead of like being ashamed and being guilty about those kinds of sexual feelings, it's better to just acknowledge them and kind of like not necessarily act on them, but to acknowledge them and not let it make you shameful about all sex or make you anti-sex, you know. So that's what those movies tended to do too. They allow people to work out these kind of repressed feelings, and it was almost like a cathartic kind of thing going on.
Yeah, I mean, you sort of really kind of like also kind of like touch upon that sort of like the shame versus no shame sort of dichotomy, with the sort of the, you know, the Catholic or Christian sort of like the whipping over the underwear ads in the
Oh,
catalog,
right, right.
that kind of flagellation,
Yeah,
so the sort of
that's
like
from my childhood for sure, like jerking off to the Simpsons catalog. Yeah.
me as well. I mean, I feel like if you're gay of a certain age, it sort of was part of the thing because, you know, we didn't have necessarily access to pornography, but we're, you know, we're always sexual beings regardless of how old
And it
we
makes
are.
you think how radically the world has changed in the last 40, 50 years, where, you know, when we were kids, my first contact with porn, besides Robert Altman, was you know, my older brother had copies of Naked Lunch and Henry Miller's Tropic of Cancer and Capricorn, and you know, literature was my first access to porn, you know. So, and now, I mean, the every not only is porn totally ubiquitous and everywhere, but everyone's a porn star now, you know.
It's a
You know,
true.
with OnlyFans.
Well, it's funny because that sort of circles on to like sort of my next question too. Is like one of the things I really found that was super fascinating about about the film and being it's set in the 70s, but there's this sort of like preoccupation that sort of narcissism and the sort of with Dominique's sort of like obsessive Polaroid selfies, which I, as someone who owned a Polaroid camera in the 80s, used to take a lot of selfies
Oh yeah, with your Polaroid.
with my Polaroid. Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, it was like a sort of a chronicle. I felt like
yeah.
it was sort of like chronicling sort of
Mhm.
things I did, different looks, you know, different clothes, different things,
Sure.
stuff like that. So I mean, I always fell in love with a sort of a camera when I picked it up.
Yeah,
So when I saw that, I was just like,
and it was always used in fashion too, as you know, with stylists. Still is.
yeah, to sort of like kind of like capture the moment without actually like sort of. I mean, it is
Yeah.
there's a certain permanence to
Mhm.
that sort of Polaroid that kind of pops out, but there's a certain instancy that we didn't really get in photography until the sort of advocation of like sort of cell phones and um,
Yeah,
digital
for
sort of
sure.
photography. But I thought it was really, really humorous when he comes out of the tavern and he like is drunkenly taking a selfie.
Right.
I mean,
And also handing them to strangers. It's almost like a, you know, this desire to not only take a photo of yourself as a kind of narcissistic thing, but to share it with other people, you know.
right.
Um, so yeah, and again, in terms of 70s, you know, appreciation, that camera, that particular camera he's using, came out in 1972, so or the year before, so it's very authentic in that way.
I mean, I really love that. And I mean, again, the sort of the art direction and the production design were sort of, it would absolutely genius in this.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
hair, the makeup, the clothing, everything is like, was so like the interiors of everything were really sort of like spot on. And so much appreciated because it really sort of it made it kind of timeless in a weird way, but it also sort of anchored it in a moment as well.
yeah. uh, Also, you know, I worked with a crew of kind of veterans where the DP that I worked with, um, Michel Laveau, he's like kind of a legendary Quebecois cinematographer, and he worked with the people I was referencing. He worked with like Paul Almond Claude Jutra and Francis Mankiewicz and all these great, Quebecois directors. And so in order to capture that mood, even though we were shooting on HD, he used lenses from the period and a lighting kit that he would have used in the 70s. So there was no filter in post. It was all done in camera, So
I mean, that's absolutely amazing, because it really looks like it could have been from the time, like we stumbled upon this sort of lost VHS tape.
yeah, I like that. I think my film Gerontophilia has a bit of that quality too, where even though it's set in a contemporary time, we tried to shoot it to look like a 70s 35 millimeter movie. So it's cool that it kind of isn't fixed in time,
Yeah, it has a sort of like a buoyancy that kind of moves out. So
Mhm.
why Narcissus as a sort of like a myth to sort of expand upon and sort of bring connect the point from obviously Greek mythology to today?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, obviously it's like a myth that's been around forever, and I don't know. I mean, in say more in gay terms, the kind of phenomenon in the gay world where people tend to either look for a sexual partner that is the exact opposite of them, or one that looks exactly identical to them. So we call them twinnies. When you see, two gay boyfriends walking down the street and they're dressed identically, they have the same body, so they've obviously found their narcissistic soulmate, so there was a bit of that idea going on there. And then just to relate it to, I mean, there's several types of narcissism going on in the film, and some narcissism is good and necessary, I think.
Mhm.
I mean, the tagline for the film is "Love thyself," so some of it is just like, which a bit tongue in cheek, but
I like
uh,
that.
um, you know, Freud talked about narcissism, and for him, the narcissism was about the infant's develop relationship to the mother and the mother's breast. And initially, it doesn't distinguish itself from the mother, so it thinks that it's totally solipsistic. It thinks that it is the mother and the breast. That's its identity. And then there's the separation from the breast, which differentiates itself as an individual from the mother. So that's kind of narcissistic development. And but there's also narcissism that is bad, like Instagram. I mean, if you really look at what's going on, I mean, people are not even ironic about it. They're just like gazing at themselves, nonstop, and they're kind of almost fixated by their own image, and they're really blatant about it. It always kills me when people like post like, which photo of this which one of these photos do you like better? Do I look like more gorgeous in this one or more gorgeous? I mean, it's just so blatant now, it's something we wouldn't have gotten away with, 15 years ago.
No, not at
Um,
all.
yeah. And so that, I think that can be very negative, because it's very solipsistic. It's like the whole world revolves around you. It's about, there's an element of body fascism. There's an element of like this projection of the ideal self, where everyone, where people who are on social media feel this pressure to conform to that kind of idea of perfection and stuff. It's all tied in with narcissism, I think. But there, in the film, there's bad narcissism. The twins' narcissism is kind of positive, because they complete each other. They both have something that's missing, and they don't kind of really love themselves. And then only when they are reunited with, that part of themselves that has been missing, are they complete and can love again. So that, everyone can relate to that. There could be a part of you that's missing that you need to find in order to, get beyond your narcissism and and become whole. But then, in a way, the priest, Father Andrew, and the mother character are Beatrice. They're kind of narcissists in a way, because they pursue their desires selfishly without thinking of the consequences of how it might affect, their children. They're very kind of focused on that kind of fulfillment of their desire. Beatrice with her lover's daughter, and Father Andrew with Daniel. So there's all different. I think there's good narcissism and bad narcissism.
Yeah, they in many ways, like Beatrice and Father Andrew almost seem like two sides of a coin, maybe.
Oh, absolutely.
And I really kind of appreciated that too, because it wasn't, it didn't get wrapped up in sort of moralism either, because we had the witch of the woods, and
Yeah,
we had the sort of the pious
the Wiccan kind of pot smoking Wiccan kind of pseudo hippie kind of free love, mother that is quite sympathetic character, and then the strict father who who has whatever drug he's doing, like some kind of
yeah, I'm like, what is that drug?
crazy drug. I don't know. It's definitely not organic, whatever. Yeah.
And his penchant for Saint Sebastian too. It was like, it was kind of
Yeah.
like, speaking
Yeah.
of fetish. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
Which
But they are very, I tried to contrast the whole world of Beatrice and nature, and and the kind of that kind of Wiccan spirituality, and then with the very strict monastery environment, which is repressed and kind of ends up being like super perverse.
Yeah, it's funny how both sort of worlds have this sort of like, I don't know, that like because the forest and the sort of the house and stuff like that has this sort of like this easiness and this sort of like kind of transcendence to it, whereas
Mhm.
the monastery also has a transcendence, but it's almost very forced in many ways, because it's all kind of created with the sort of the artwork and all that kind of stuff. And what a great location. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know how much of that was created, but like what an amazing sort of like location the monastery was, because it was
Yeah.
absolutely gorgeous.
It was actually a former nunnery,
Oh wow.
and the art director had to butch it up because because there was only um, paintings of women, and so we've brought in some of men, or just focused on the male, and also we put, like, with the lighting, we kind of made it darker and more subdued, and we put in like sort of these candle stands and things that were very masculine. So yeah, we disguised it.
So it was a nunnery. So does that kind of link in Black Narcissus into
Oh,
into
it could.
yeah, to your
It
film?
could.
Maybe unwillingly?
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is funny because I just rewatched Black Narcissus probably months ago, because FX made a new version of it. Like, it made like a mini sort of series of it, which is,
Oh,
it was
I didn't know
weird,
that.
but it was
Yeah.
weird and cool at the same time.
Black
But
Narcissus I more referenced in my last movie, The Misandrists,
yes,
with the nuns. Yeah.
little underlying sort of thematic threads, I guess.
Mhm.
So I guess the I guess my next question for you is, how has the sort of, I mean, this was all made before pre-pandemic,
Mm.
and thankfully with the support of the Quebec Film Commission. So
Yeah.
how has the sort of the pandemic, one, been treating you personally,
Mm.
and also as an artist? And I guess the follow-up question to that would be, what is next?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, we were interrupted during post production, so it was all shot, and and it was all edited, but then the pandemic really kicked in, like last March or whatever, and we had done a couple weeks of post. That would be like, you know, the sound and sound mix and the color timing and the you know, the soundtrack and all that kind of stuff. So we had to go on hiatus for like 3 weeks, I think, or maybe a month, and then went back when it opened up a little and finished it. So I mean, the good thing about that was, I mean, at least we weren't interrupted during shooting, which is every filmmaker's nightmare. I know people who had to stop like during either pre-production or shooting, which is, you know, when you make a film, your philosophy is any whatever it takes, anything to get the film. Like there's no catastrophe that is going to stop you from finishing the shooting, you know. And then when something like an act of God like that or goddess happens, and then it's really a filmmaker's worst nightmare, you know. But so then, you know, and then we were lucky again because the pandemic kind of waned a bit, the numbers waned last year, the beginning of September. And so we were able to actually premiere it at the Venice Film Festival, and in theaters, which weren't full capacity, but like half. So there was like, you know, 300-400 people, and we had the glamorous kind of, especially for my actor, Felix Antoine Duval, who's amazing, and who played the twins. And he's never experienced a glamorous, he's more of a TV star in Quebec. Mm-hmm. So he never experienced like a glamorous international opening before. And the Canadian ambassador to Italy came to the opening, and we just had a great time. We were eating al fresco, and, you know, Matt Dillon was eating at the next table beside us and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And then I was hoping I would be able to go to a few more festivals, but unfortunately then it kind of all closed down after that. So, you know, it's a bit disappointing that I didn't get to travel more with it. But on the other hand, as a filmmaker, as an artist, I was a bit burned out with traveling. I've been traveling a lot for the past 5-7 years, constantly almost with my films. So so I was kind of happy in one way with the break, you know. And then in terms of working during lockdown, I find it difficult, to be honest. I mean, I put out a book called Death Book, which is a kind of book that compiles all my most extreme sexually violent imagery. So that was a pandemic project, where I went into my archives and, you know, worked with editors and produced this really nice book. And I'm working on another photo book. So that's one thing I've been doing. It's coming out. It's called Fixations, and it's a big coffee table book. And then I have been writing scripts. I shot one film after Saint-Narcisse, which was a porn movie for the Atama Finland porn movie. That was a series that a porn company in Montreal did, actually. And it was called Service Station, and it was based on a Atama Finland cake. So I shot that cake comic. So that was I shot that a year ago, November. So that was actually the last film I shot. So now, yeah, just waiting. I have 3 or 4 scripts in development, waiting to see which one might get financed first. And I have another porn movie I'm going to be doing with Erica Lust as soon as I'm able, and which is kind of interesting. It's more of a feature length porno.
Nice.
Yeah.
I think more feature length pornos should happen, because I miss the sort of that 70s sort of like movie like Joe Gage or oh my god, what is it, Cafe Flash,
Sure.
Stuff that sort of had, or the Audubon films that had that sort of like cinematic sort of story narrative in.
Oh yeah, like all the great hand-in-hand films like Jack DeVoe and Peter DeRome and Wakefield Poole. Yeah, I'm always highly have been influenced by those films. And that's, yeah, Erica Lust is trying to do a series of of longer feature-length films with more developed narratives and things like that. So
I think it's a good antithesis to all the sort of the amateur kind of like immediacy that porn has in like 2020 right now.
yeah, and I'm kind of waiting for there to be more of a. I was just talking to some kids in Montreal for a podcast yesterday, and we were talking about how there still is kind of this weird divide between the mainstream industry, film industry, and the porn industry, and how you would almost there's kind of still a glass ceiling for pornographers, and you would be expecting a more of a crossover at this point, since porn is so ubiquitous and not maybe quite as taboo as it used to be. So, but it kind of hasn't happened yet.
No, it really hasn't. It still has this weird taboo,
Yeah.
which I've never really understood. And maybe I've made peace with my sort of my Catholic upbringing or whatever. My morality is a little bit more, I guess, universally focused. But I'm glad that you're sort of thinking along those lines as well.
Mm.
I have to say the sex scenes in Saint-Narcisse are really interesting because we have that scene at the beginning in the laundromat, which is kind of amazing, and I love that it's actually a spectacle
Yes.
through glass, because it reminded me of like peep shows and like sort of that kind of thing. But it was also like it reminded me also of the internet, that you had that sort of like glass window distance between that, and you were sort of like a casual observer.
And he's also it could be a dream, so he's also kind of performing sex in a way that almost seems like a porn performance or something, you know. But then but the sex scene between the twins was amazing, because I tried to use as few digital effects as possible. Most of the special effects are just kind of like old school effects, like split screen and body double, but so we used a body double for that the sex scene, and it really gives it a kind of gritty realistic kind of quality. It's quite passionate, and I don't think you could do that with digital effects.
No, I completely agree with that, because the sex, it felt like a true union and a true meeting of the two of them, which I thought was really kind of like wonderful as a sort of like a turning point of the film, of them getting kind of together and kind of reuniting and sort of being, and they fit together. Like I like that actually, that their bodies were just like so kind of like entwined with each other, because it felt like puzzle pieces sort of finally connecting, which was kind of nice.
Finally the two halves becoming whole.
It was really beautiful. So so well done with that. I also want to like say thank you also for your line of houseware and t-shirts, because I have to say
my merch,
all your merch. I'm like, thanks for that, because it allows us fans to sort of like revisit your work a lot, which is kind of it's always a nice thing. So because you are a very prolific auteur, we'll say, and again, that sort of is super appreciative as well.
The porn shower curtains are particularly nice, I think.
I have a Hustler white one, which has got Tony and oh my god, why am I drawing a blank? But it's got Tony and it's like a superposition.
Ron Athey.
Ron Athey, yes, thank you.
Oh yeah, that was great.
I when I saw that, I was like, oh, I need a new shower curtain, but I definitely need this shower curtain.
that makes a great one.
So Bruce, thank
you. Which is threadless. I should plug it.
Yeah, so
you can go to Bruce at threadless.com. You can find my merch.
Yeah, Wicked Queer audience, buy some merch, please. It's really amazing.
They even have skateboards.
What?
You can get like the revolution is my boyfriend skateboard.
That's amazing. I love the perfect thing for a skate park.
I think
or
join the homosexual intifada.
Yes. Even better. Bruce, it was such a pleasure sitting down and talking to you.
Yeah, thanks for. I think you're having the U.S. premiere.
Oh,
With,
nice.
yeah, which is
That's
nice.
the two, which is great, and hopefully
Yeah,
this will get a lot more U.S. screenings. Because
yeah. I mean, we have a great U.S. distributor, Film Movement, and so it'll be released for streaming across the U.S. sometime. I think it's either going to be midsummer or early fall, but possibly midsummer. So
perfect summer movie.
I think so.
I would agree. And again, it's such a pleasure sitting down with you and spending some time and talking about Saint Narcisse. Um,
Sure, my pleasure.
uh,
Enjoy the screening, everybody.
Thank you. So Wicked Queer fans and audience, if you haven't seen Saint Narcisse yet, what are you waiting for? It's screening April 8th to the 18th on our Zerb channel. For tickets and more information about the festival, go to www.wickedqueer.org and go see it. And again, thank you so much, Bruce.
My pleasure.